Welcome back. My name's Mike Schmidt, former Multnomah County District Attorney, current amateur pizza chef. I got one of those cool ovens in my backyard now. It's pretty sweet. I'm not very good at it. I've only lit 2 or 3 on fire so far. And of course, part-time podcaster. And today we have a show for you. We're talking party politics, and one party in particular that seems to be surging right now at a moment when it feels like both major parties in our predominantly two-party system are going through their own realignments, and more voters than ever are turned off by that entire arrangement. Let's talk about some of the numbers here in Oregon. 26% of Oregonians think that this state is headed in the right direction. 85% say the cost of living is getting worse. 77% say housing is getting worse. And 1.4 million Oregonians, 44% of every registered voter in the state, aren't registered with either major party. That's more people than are registered Democrat or Republican. Some of that is genuine frustration with both parties. Some of it is probably just not being inspired by either one, or maybe not ever having sat down and worked out a preference. Either way, it's a massive block that neither party can fully claim. And this spring, the Working Families Party started shaking up Democratic primaries, not afraid to back candidates who align more closely with working family values and to take on powerful incumbents backed by more centrist and moderate interests. By WFP's own count, this marked the first time since 2018 that a sitting Democratic state senator lost a primary in Oregon. 37 of their 49 endorsed candidates won their races. So today I'm sitting down with the person running that operation, Naranjo Rivera, state director of the Oregon Working Families Party, to find out what it is they actually stand for, whether they can reach that huge block of unclaimed voters, and what happens when a party built to primary Democrats has to also answer to Republicans and independents who are frustrated with the exact same things. This is Schmidt Show PDX. Let's get into it. Welcome to the Schmidt Show, Naranjo Rivera, State Director of WFP.
Thank you for having me.
So excited for you to be here. I'm big fan, big supporter of the Working Families Party. Really appreciate all the work that you all do. What is the Working Families Party, and why is it necessary?
It's funny. I walked into the gas station the other day and I was wearing my Working Families Party sweatshirt, and just some random gas station attendants were like, yeah, that's what we need, a party for working families. Right. And they're like, we don't do politics, but they responded that way just to the message of a party that would, stand up for working families. And that's really what we are. So we've seen that the two-party system doesn't really deliver for working people, and we deserve something better. And so enter the Working Families Party. In Oregon, we've existed for 20 years, but we're at a really important time where people are sort of waking up to the fact that we can actually ask for what we deserve, and we deserve a political party that meets our needs and isn't just fighting for the wealthy and well-connected.
I have a Working Families sweatshirt, a hoodie. I love it.
Did you get the same response?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. First of all, it's just 3 bold words: Working Families Party. And it's so funny to me. I can see people processing as they read it, and I can tell they don't know the political connotations of it. And they're also like, yeah, let's party. Like, we're in this together.
I'm a working family.
Yeah. Or like you say, or people who do understand like the political connotation, but they don't know it exists. So they're like, we do need that. Like that. Yeah. And I'm like, good news, it exists.
Let me tell you, actually. But I'm like kind of incognito out at the coast where I live. And so it's like, yes, I'm the state director running the political party, the Working Families Party, for the whole state of Oregon.
Yeah.
And, just in a small community out there in rural Tillamook County. So it's interesting that message does resonate from Portland all the way out to every corner of the state. People are like, we can reimagine what has existed. And even people that haven't paid attention to mainstream politics at all are like, we're struggling.
Yeah.
We need a voice. And they're like, maybe this is our voice.
Maybe this is it.
And maybe this is our time. So
I couldn't agree more. I think all of us are, and I don't care what your political stripe or background is, most people, it seems, are really struggling. And maybe
Yeah.
you feel like you're more conservative and you've traditionally voted for Republicans, but right now you're like, this is not my party. And same with Democrats who
Yeah.
feel like this is not the party that has my interests at heart. What's your origin story, Annie? How did you get into this work being the state director of the Working Families Party?
No, it's, it's really personal for me. I'm the daughter of a Cuban refugee, and I grew up in poverty. And, then I was fortunate to be really well educated and presented with a lot of opportunities that I think every child deserves. And I work every day to make that reality be true. So I don't think that it is too much to ask for people to have those kind of, to have access to a high quality education and food on their table. So yeah, my family struggled a lot, and I'm pretty fortunate. I live in one of the most beautiful places in the state, and I frequently try to escape politics. I jokingly say that, if I could and I could walk away and I would know that things are okay, I would. But right now, we're all being called to work together to build coalitions and fight for a different reality because, we see everything like from the number of people accessing food banks going up exponentially to people not being able to pay their rent, utility bills going up. And we see more and more, the powers that be are beholden to like corporations. We have people who are bought and paid for by corporate interests, and they are just unaware of the struggles of working people. And I'd say even like well-intentioned, like middle upper income politicians just don't know what they don't know. They don't have the lived experience. So personally, I'm really passionate about making sure that we can uplift and empower folks with lived experience to be in the decision-making spaces. And that's the only way that we're going to have policy changes, everything from, in your local school board or city council on up to the top of the ticket. We're just not going to see change until we have those voices and that representation, which is why, my whole story comes to building the Working Families Party and building the multiracial working class. So for me, being biracial and having a father who's, a refugee and that lived experience, poverty, having a single mom, being a child of domestic violence, and all these things that shaped who I am caused me to be a warrior, I guess, on all those fronts. So I'll probably do this until I die, unless we achieve our goals sooner than that. It's a lifelong project.
I think a lot of people maybe have a lot of, pieces and similarities of their own struggle and where they've come from, but haven't reached the same conclusion that you have. And It seems like what you have seen in your life or experienced is that politics actually matters and can change people's lives. I hear a lot of people that they're like, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. And I think especially with our two party dominated system, you hear a lot of they're both bought by mega corporations. They're both bought by the oligarch class who runs things. And I certainly see evidence of that all over Oregon. So what is it about you that you've actually seen this work for people?
It's really a special thing to get to see people come into their own power and to get to be part of watching what we call co-governance, which is where, there is some kind of people-powered movement and campaign that coalesces with somebody who's in a position of power. That policy is achieved. There's victory. And that like really beautiful synthesis that happens in that victory gives me hope to know that we can continue to do this on a bigger scale. Those people aren't wrong. I mean, I've knocked hundreds of thousands of doors all over the country. We used to say turf is turf all over the earth because, and turf is, the area where you're knocking doors, because in like rural South Dakota or the middle of the metro somewhere in a big city, people are seeing the same things and those struggles are similar across all of these lines.
I have been affiliated and supported by and a supporter of the Working Families Party. I think one of the things that I would characterize it as, and I want you to tell me if this resonates or if I'm not thinking of it correctly, but a through line that I see for people from the coast to the metro to the desert, all across, is at the end of the day, a lot of our struggles are the same.
Yeah.
It's things you've already mentioned. It's childcare, it's food on the table, it's a job that pays a living wage, it's health care. I don't care what your political stripe is, those things matter to everybody. And so the way that I think about the Working Families Party is traditionally you've got these left-right dynamics, and those are clearly at play, but it almost seems like bottom-top dynamics for the Working Families Party.
Absolutely. And essentially we've got this, you hear people like Bernie Sanders talking about the oligarchs, but that's real. So, in Oregon politics, we see it. There is this corporate class of people who are bought and paid for by corporate entities, and that's how they make their decisions. So they're not thinking about people who don't have food on the table in rural Oregon. They're not thinking about folks who don't have gas to put in their tank in Portland, or the fact that this utility increase is going to mean the difference between somebody being able to pay their rent or not, or what would happen if there was a healthcare bill that came out of nowhere, or any kind of misfortune that could come upon a person. So it really is all of us versus this tiny, minuscule group of people. So back to your question about, hope and optimism that I have for us being able to do this. Essentially, all of us, we do have strength in numbers, which, has become cliche, but I have seen the power that we have collectively. So really the disengaged people and, so many folks in my family, like, I don't do politics. Like, none of this matters. Annie does this crazy stuff. I don't know why she does it. She helps me fill up my ballot.
I text her once a year.
But, more and more people are like, actually, like, can we do this? And even people who have like come out to like a protest for the first time, it's like, that's not the end all be all. Like, coming to a protest isn't going to change fundamentally the entire fabric of our society, but people are waking up, and they're waking up to their power and what our collective power is. Again, like, if we have people who are from the working class, from that like bottom 99%, we absolutely can take on that top 1% and make changes, which is like a big thing about the Working Families Party. It's like we say we're a non-delusional third party. So we're not like some other third parties that I won't name, where, you see like virtue signaling, like, we're going to run the perfect person who's like 1000% ideologically aligned with us. And we're going to do it for purity's sake. It's like, well, okay, there's nothing wrong with that person. Maybe they're lovely, but what are you delivering for working people? So when we continue to see that the only resistance to this corporate class, like that top, is, a couple of folks that we're throwing out there just for feel good.
Right.
People do get the message that it's not possible, change isn't possible, but that's not true. Change is absolutely possible. And not only will we run our people, we'll train them, we'll train the staff to run their races, and then we will deliver for the working class. And that responsibility we take really seriously, because once we get our folks elected, there's a high bar. This is an experiment that's very public and people are watching. So for instance, like in the Portland City Council, it's like, we got all these progressive working class champions elected, and now we need to deliver. And people are going to be watching, and that is going to reflect whether or not everyone believes that change is possible, which it is.
Well, you said non-delusional, and I like that. It resonates with some of the, I'll say, third or fourth or fifth political parties that we see that run these purist candidates. And not to knock that. I think there's a place for that, right? We see people run that know they're not going to win because they want their issue to be elevated. Nothing wrong with that. Another way I think of saying what you're saying, I might say, is pragmatic. That your concern is actually delivering wins for working families. You're not here to just say, oh, we matter, don't forget about us. You're like, no, we're at the table, and we're going to force you to the table because working 100%. Families' lives are at stake.
We always say, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
That's one of my favorite sayings.
We're telling people, pull up a seat to the table.
Yeah.
You deserve to be at this table. And for too long, the two major parties have held a stranglehold. And honestly, it's not the necessarily grassroots members of those parties. It's the people who are running and setting the agenda. And those people are bought and paid for again by like corporate interests. So they're protecting their own. They're not thinking about the struggles of the working class.
Well, one of the things that I think demonstrates what we're talking about is that the Working Families Party has and would get into races across the traditional political spectrum.
Yeah.
You've gotten into Republican races and obviously Democratic races. So you're not just a internal function to push the Democratic Party, but you are there to fight for working families. Because let's face it, in some communities, a Republican's going to win.
Yeah.
Right. So you have gotten into some of those races to fight for getting working families issues on the agenda. And I think that's what speaks to the fact that your focus is on delivering for people. So talk a little bit about that, because I think a lot of people might think, oh, Working Families Party, aren't they just like some sort of Democratic insider party?
Yeah. Well, just to go back to what you were saying about being ruthlessly pragmatic, that's what we say. You know, we do need to be strategic in terms of like what we're able to deliver. So as we look at the whole map of the state, it's like, you know, we're absolutely not just like some faction of the Democratic Party. First of all, in Oregon, we're one of 3 states that has fusion voting. So we actually are a minor political party. And so that's an identity. You know, we've got people who are registered WFP voters. And
say more about the fusion.
Yeah.
Like unpack, because even I was like, I grew up in New York. I could vote for a Working Family Party candidate.
Yes.
Like it was like, you know, you vote for the Democrat
You're going to start with the complicated question.
You could vote for Working Family Barack Obama, right? Like
exactly. No, it's really something that a lot of people don't know unless you're, you know, like a history or civics teacher.
Yeah.
But we used to have fusion voting in many places in the country. Oregon has like a hybrid version. So if you're like Mike in New York, you could see Zohran Mandami, Democrat, and you could vote for him on the Democratic Party line. And on your same ballot, you would see Zohran Mandami, Working Families Party. In fact, Zohran put out a video and was like, I'm voting for myself on the Working Families Party line. Like, join me in working on the Working Families Party line. What's cool about that is in New York, you can actually see this percentage of people came to this candidate because of Working Families Party.
I love that.
Which we can't see in Oregon yet.
But we'd like to.
One day. But here right now, what we still do have, and we're fortunate for that, is we have fusion voting. It is not disaggregated like that. So it's not broken out and you can't see this is the amount of people that came from Working Families Party. But we know from polling basically that we still bring a significant chunk of voters to a candidate. So you'll see somebody on your ballot like Christina Stevenson, Labor Commissioner, Democrat, comma, Working Families Party, comma, independent. And here you can list up to 3 parties.
Okay.
So she could get a chunk of voters from independents. She could get a chunk from Working Families Party and the Democratic Party. But what's interesting is even Democrats are looking for the Working Families Party. So when they see that on there, that signals to people, this is somebody who meets this threshold and is meeting these values, which are a home you can afford, healthcare you can count on, a good job to support your family, childcare when and where you need it, and time to spend with your family, which we don't think is too much to ask.
You anticipated my next question. The values. So are those the 5? It seems like that was 5 if I'm doing my math. 5 planks of the Working Families Party.
And, you know, there are a lot of other things that we deeply care about. For instance, like we've fought for, you know, a long time for a state bank. And so there are like more specific policies. And from, you know, year to year, we're fighting for different things. This year, the big struggle has been, you know, dealing with the attacks coming from the Trump administration and the federal government. So, you know, we worked really heavily on the immigrant justice package bills to protect all of our community members and our constitutional rights. And also, you know, as we're facing these huge, massive like cuts to healthcare and everything through the big, beautiful bill, HR 1, you know, a massive struggle that we were a big part of is fighting to disconnect from Trump's tax code
Mhm.
so we can make our own decisions here in Oregon about how we can avoid being in a $900 million deficit hole and fund things like SNAP and like keeping food on the table and healthcare and all the things, childcare, schools.
Yeah.
So,
I don't want to get off topic, but
Yeah.
my last episode and my first episode this season were both about the Governor's Prosperity Council. And one of the
I have thoughts.
recommendations is to reconnect the QSBS tax issue, tax credits for people who are investors into startups, that they could take shares of stock instead of salary, and that should be taxed at a lower rate. That's one of the things that came out of HR1 and Oregon disconnected from. So the Prosperity Council, the Governor's Prosperity Council, is saying, no, we need to reconnect that because we're not competitive.
Well, what I do know is,
Yeah.
and also we could do a whole different podcast on this, but we do not support the recommendations of the Governor's Prosperity Council, and I think it maybe is inappropriately named for the proposals they put forward will not lead to prosperity for Oregon. So, we're pretty vehemently opposed to a lot of the things that you saw there, but not super surprising considering who was appointed there. So,
well, if you're listening to this episode and you want a deeper dive into the Governor's Prosperity Council, check out the previous episode with Juan Carlos Ordonez from the Oregon Center for Public Policy, because we do a deep dive into their perspective on those recommendations. I want to get back to WFP. Sorry, it was my aside. So it sounds like, you have the 5 planks. Of course, there are policies that you see that are important to achieving your main 5 planks, but the 5 planks, as you just read them to me, childcare, living wages, I can't name them all.
Again, it's a home you can afford, healthcare you can rely on, a good job to support your family, childcare when and where you need it, and time to spend with your family.
So it strikes me, who is against those things? who
right?
is...
It's pretty common sense. So we've gotten to the place where some people would say, oh, are you like a radical leftist group? And I'm like, I can't understand how anyone could say that any of the things I just listed are radical. It's not radical to think this is the American dream.
Yep.
Time to spend with your family, childcare. If you're working full time, you should be guaranteed some basic stability and some basic rights to enjoy living. And that's what the working class is asking for. So as we're talking to people across the state, people are like, I just want to not have to work 3 jobs and still be unable to meet my basic needs and be wondering how I'm going to make it through the day. And that's what, we're fighting for. So to tie that back to WFP, it's like the political home is the vehicle for getting those things. And as one individual, it may feel hopeless. You may be out there and you're like, nothing good is ever going to happen. It's not possible. But when we can bring people together into this political home, we absolutely can deliver on these things, and we will.
One of my favorite elected representatives is Representative Dacia Graber.
Love her.
She just put out a statement. In fact, my wife was reading it to me. She was highlighting, I think in the social media post, that there was a study that came out that Oregonians who rely on the Oregon Health Plan, a large percentage of them work for major retailers like Amazon, like Walmart, like and
I saw that.
Yeah, exactly. And I love, first of all, shout out to Dacia, incredible representative.
And the firefighters right now across Oregon.
And
everywhere.
Our thoughts and our gratefulness for firefighters across the state and across the country dealing with wildfires. I so appreciated that she called that out, because I think, all these people being like, healthcare, you should work for it or whatever. It's like, people are working. They're working 3 jobs and not getting healthcare. And the state is picking up that bill, which is corporate welfare. We are subsidizing corporations being able to pay their workers less with our tax dollars.
1,000%.
And then yet you have people being like, oh, I don't think we need healthcare for everybody. And it's just
and
like
these handouts. Well,
these handouts. Exactly.
So I live out on, I live in Tillamook County, and where I am, not only is there a complete shortage of medical providers that will take Medicaid, so there's access issues with the current system, but we're facing more cuts. So, we've got hospitals closing, like Seaside Providence just closed their maternity ward.
Right.
And so it's like,
Unbelievable.
where are people going to go if they need to give birth on the North Coast? And we're starting to sort of see these dynamics across all of the spaces. So there's pharmacy shortages, there's provider shortages. And on top of that, we're facing more cuts. I don't think people realize as we see the rolling impacts of Trump's policies in the next year in 2027, significant cuts are going to happen to Medicaid.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people were like, oh, I don't want that Obamacare. And it's like, oh, you're on the OHP. That is Obamacare, right?
Yeah.
And so folks started to realize like, oh, hey, I'm a poor or working poor person, working class family, and my kids can only go to the doctor because we're on OHP. And we're lucky we have a doctor because the few towns over don't have one. So those folks drive here to our doctor, and so on. So that has sort of been like how we've gotten by. But we have a big opportunity. Actually, I'm glad you started talking about healthcare because, in this moment of great crisis where people are going to be kicked off, there are going to be cuts to Medicaid. There are going to be, cuts to even the limited things that people have come to expect, possibly dental and mental health and things like that. Moving forward, we have an opportunity. So there is going to be the potential to put in place, a universal healthcare system. And everyone's like, how are you going to pay for that? It's like, very good question. This all ties together. Revenue, we do need to raise revenue, and it's not going to be done properly through the recommendations of someone like Tina Kotek's Prosperity Council. We need to not ask that working people carry this on their backs. These taxes should not be on the backs of working people. Absolutely, the ultra wealthy need to pay their fair share. And that hasn't happened in Oregon. So we have a lot of proposals. I won't bore everyone on your show with, you talked about OCPP. They have tons of incredible resources and we work with them,
I was ready to run Juan Carlos for president. I was like, you should do it, man. I like what you're saying.
He's wonderful. But basically, there are mechanisms that we can use to get to a fairer tax system and pay for the things that we need. So it's, you wouldn't go to a grocery store and be like, I'd like to buy this box of crackers. And then they're like, oh, okay, sure. We'll send you a bill later for that. And you get home, you're eating the crackers and you're like, oh, wow, I just got this bill. I owe $1,000 for a box of crackers. You would never do that, right? And that is what our healthcare system is like. It's just like, you don't know. Or maybe you go and you're like, oh, I'm starving, hungry. I need a box of crackers. And they're like, I'm sorry.
Not in this town.
You can't have any crackers here.
You're going to have to drive 4 hours.
But I'm starving. I'm going to die. And so we've got all these problems with the current system and we have an opportunity. So I always like to think about the silver lining. It's like in this time of crisis, how can we reimagine what is possible together? And we have more and more champions. And there are people like Dacia Graber, legislative champions, who are visionary and who have a different vision for what's possible. So tying into like what we're doing now, our elections work, it's like, okay, if there are people who maybe are from an older paradigm and they are serving corporate interests, they're taking corporate dollars in their re-elections. When you see somebody who's taking like $500,000 in corporate donations, who do you think that person's going to serve when they're elected into office, right? So sometimes, primary interventions are a thing that we do as the Working Families Party.
We're gonna get to that.
We talked about, our ballot line. So we cross-nominate people in the general election. So in November, you'll have a chance to vote for Working Families Party candidates. But at the primary election, which just passed, you'll also see Working Families Party. And in fact, that's the place to start looking because when we're putting our name behind somebody in a primary, that's a big deal.
Yeah. Well, I think, to the extent that people feel like, oh, well, I'm not sure politics will ever change anything. Everybody serves the same corporate masters. It's like, well, if politics got us into this mess, then politics can get out. And there's a reason those corporate masters and oligarchs are pouring money into it because they are getting what they want right now.
Absolutely.
And so I think if people realize, no, actually, if we band together for our interests, we can get what we want, because it turns out the government actually has to listen to us.
They do. Well, and think about who it benefits. So they want everyone to feel disempowered. They want people to be
exactly
out of their power. So who is benefiting in the system the way that it is, right? And that's kind of what you have to look at. So absolutely, they have a vested interest in keeping things the way that they have been, but it doesn't have to be that way. It is hard. So it's hard to run candidates for office, and it's hard to get our champions elected into these positions when we're up against dollars like that.
Yeah.
But truly what we've seen in races like Myrna Munoz out in
I was just going to get there. Yeah, let me ask that question. So there was a big primary race, multiple big primary races. First of all, congratulations on your success in the primaries. Working Families Party did exceedingly well with the candidates that they backed. One of those candidates was Myrna Munoz against incumbent Janine Sulman. Janine Sulman was backed by a lot of money. And there were some big kind of, I think, corporate interests into the outcome of that race. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that specifically? Because this, probably people are aware. The Oregonian, covered this and made a gaffe at the
multiple times.
Yeah, at the 5-yard line. And so tell us about that race, why you targeted that race. I mean, because again, a lot of times people just think, oh, well, the Democrats and the Working Family Party, they're aligned. But this was you guys targeted a race because you felt like there was somebody there that was better to champion working family values than the incumbent.
Well, first I want to really quickly say, people think, oh, Oregon's a blue state,
right?
Portland's a blue city. Everyone's just progressive and everything's fine here. And I don't need to pay attention or it's going to be fine. Like most of the basic things are under control, whatever the basic things are. But, we've been following Washington County and there's a lot happening there, including the, county commission, which is under Democratic leadership, voted to, they were going to vote to roll back DEI, diversity and equity and inclusion protections. And one sole voice, Nafisa Faye, rose up. She's a refugee and just this incredible community leader and a county commissioner. So Commissioner Faye was this sole warrior standing up for what I think are like pretty commonly held values. Now, a normal person who's not like sitting around paying attention to all of the inner workings of politics day in and day out, like some of us, isn't going to be necessarily tracking that. They just assume like these folks are doing the right thing. They're representing me. Like everything's going to be fine. And so all of a sudden people in Washington County were like, what's going on? And we've seen that also around the data centers. All of a sudden we've got people who are like, what's happening in my backyard? I thought, these people were doing the right thing. They're Democrats.
I'm driving down this road and suddenly all this farmland is under construction. Like
exactly. And so Myrna's race to me I actually think Myrna's race is the most significant race that has happened in like the more than 2 decades that I've been working in Oregon politics. Not just because we won, but because the coalition of people that was empowered through that race and that came together was absolutely a beautiful thing to behold. And that coalition is so powerful. You had like farmers and people who are not like traditional Democrats getting involved. And if you look at who voted, there's a significant number of people who've never voted in a primary. 0 of the last 4 elections who came out and did vote for Myrna. And there's a reason for that. She's offering something that people have not previously been offered. Mm-hmm. She's offering hope. She's offering a voice and true representation. And that's what the Working Families Party is about. So those are the kind of people I'm talking about when I was saying earlier, those people with lived experience. That's Myrna, and so she really got fired up around immigration and the tepid response that we have been seeing and, definitely we're seeing with ICE activity. And so it's like, in Hillsborough, businesses, thriving businesses are shuttered because people are too afraid to come into work. People are too afraid to come to the business, to be customers. And we're not talking about necessarily only undocumented people.
Right.
It's a community-wide impact, and people are living in fear.
I have friends that are they're fully, born here, complete citizens, but they're people of color, and clearly outwardly facing.
Yeah.
Look like demographics that ICE would be targeting. They're scared to leave their house.
I carry my passport.
Carry your passport.
Yeah.
100%.
And obviously, I'm not even in the crosshairs as much as some
Right.
people would be. But so as we see that sort of lack of response, and it's irresponsible, and it's immoral to not respond in a time of crisis like this in a community like that, especially where we see like people are being targeted in greater numbers. And so I know that was a huge issue.
Well, so this brings me back, both of those issues, data centers, immigration enforcement, we have seen across this country in Republican and conservative areas and progressive and Democratic areas. We've seen people motivated to fight back against those things, to say, hey, these are our neighbors. These are people contributing to our society. They're important to us. These are not the criminals or bad guys. These are these are working families in our community. Same thing with data centers. Like, hey, what you're promising, you're getting all these tax benefits. You're not paying into our local, economy and roads and schools, and you're making our electric costs more expensive. In some places, the water supply is being damaged and taken advantage of. That's against working families. And so I guess that's what I appreciate so much about the Working Families Party. Again, it's not necessarily left, right. It is a relentless focus on families and what they need to thrive. And that's across the spectrum.
I mean, look, we know that it's immoral to take people, refuse them their constitutional legal rights, put them in what some people would describe as concentration camps, and violate their international human rights in the borders of the United States of America. That's not moral. And I feel passionately about that personally. But even if you aren't coming at it from that angle, there's economic impact and there's community safety impact. So if these ICE agents are coming and arbitrarily causing terror and fear in communities and rounding up anyone that has brown skin, that is not acceptable community wide. So there are all these levels, but essentially we know that this isn't moral. We know that this isn't legal, and we expect leadership from these elected officials. And that means being out front at a time like this. I do think with the data centers, it's the same thing. If I had a magic wand, I would not wake up and say, like, I would like this community to wake up with, their farmlands being stripped.
Their energy bills
going up, their water being contaminated, and unknown public health impacts that haven't been studied, potentially higher rates of cancer in nearby areas, things like that. It's like, I wouldn't wish that on a community. However, again, I will say silver lining, like I said before, in these times of crisis, we do see an opportunity for communities to rise up. And so all of a sudden, people who you'd never think are coming together in coalition and awakening to the power that we do have collectively. Yeah. So on Myrna's race, it was absolutely incredible to see, like a teacher and a janitor and a farmer who just was working in their field all morning, coming out to knock doors for Myrna. And when we were out there talking to people, I work with the political world where people spend ungodly amounts of money on polling to find out how voters are feeling about things. I always say, the best poll you couldn't possibly pay better money for is talking to real voters and knocking on doors and having those real conversations. That is the polling. So if you're out there doing that, you will know how people are feeling and you will be in touch with the community. We were talking to people who said things like, no one's come out here and bothered to knock on my door ever. And, we talked to somebody who was like, nobody's knocked on my door since Barack Obama's first campaign. It's like, think about how long ago that was. And so, these politicians, let's say, even if they're elected with some good intentions, they're out of touch with the people in their district. So we're out there having real conversations with folks and, saying, hey, you can stand in your power. You can have a voice in this process, and you have a champion who wants to listen to your voice. That's Myrna Munoz.
So typically, the Working Families Party frequently makes headlines by the candidates they endorse.
Yeah.
But sometimes you make headlines by the candidates you don't endorse. And we've already referenced one such candidate a couple times in this show with the Governor's Prosperity Council.
Yeah.
But the Working Families Party declined to endorse our incumbent sitting Democratic governor in the primary. And I'm sure that that is a conversation that will be revisited in the general. But can you give us any insight as to why did the Working Families Party not feel like this governor was standing up for working families?
Well, to be fair, what we said publicly is true, which is that we didn't receive any applications from people who were viable, which we care about as a non-delusional third party.
Got it.
Who were also in line with our values. And we did not actually receive an application for endorsement from the governor's office. However, I think if you look at the landscape, you see there are people like OEA members who voted not to endorse. They declined to endorse Tina Kotek in the primary. And part of the reason for that, I think, is that, you know, folks are looking at things like what happened around Preschool for All and the Prosperity Council and those kind of things. And they're seeing somebody who maybe they don't believe is going to fight for working people. I am heartened to see that she came out against the data center in Salem, and I love to see things like that. But that's what we can expect and demand of our elected officials. If we have a Democratic governor and a blue trifecta, which means we control all of the branches of government, and by we, you know, that would be blue Democrats.
Right.
We expect and demand that the needs of working people, who are the majority, not just of Democrats, but of people across the state, be what is top of mind. And that's what we are demanding, and we'll continue to demand that. Tina is going to be at our big event that we have coming up mid-August. So we have a nominating convention in person. We haven't done that since COVID. So we'll be gathering Working Families Party members and folks from, you know, like community organizations doing the work, and all of our grassroots coalitions, labor unions, and elected officials together. And she'll be there. I think that shows, you know, that it is important, and she recognizes that it's important to be in touch with what the needs of working people are.
So you're saying there's a chance.
It's going to be a member vote. So if you want to vote and you're a registered WFP voter, you can come on the 16th, Sunday the 16th. We'll have our cross-nomination convention. So like we talked about with the ballot, where you see Zoran, Working Families Party, Democrat, etc., there is a chance to nominate in any partisan race. And we don't just nominate Democrats. So theoretically, a Republican could be cross-nominated, or an independent. And we have done that before. And in fact, we did work on a Republican race, a challenge against Cliff Benz in Congressional District 2, where there was a union member, a SEIU member, incredible human being who threw their hat in the ring against Cliff Benz, and is a Republican. And, you know, she's like, I ride horses, I do all the things. I'm a cowgirl, SEIU member in CD2, and is in line with our values, and, you know, wants to fight for working people. That obviously is a long shot kind of a race. Like, that's not the kind of congressional race that we necessarily are like, this is going to win right now. But building that traction and helping people know that there is a different reality than just somebody who is not in touch with the folks in their district and taking big corporate handouts.
You know, one of the things you mentioned, the Democratic control of all the major statewide offices in this state. I mean, the legislature, the courts by virtue of appointment frequently, and of course, the major statewide elected offices. One of the things that I think a lot of people are disappointed in is we hear all the time from our elected officials, just what's not possible. We just don't have money for that. That's so hard. And look, I'm not saying that these things aren't hard. They are. And it's challenging to find, you know, resources and other things. But then you look nationally and you look at the Trump administration and the Republicans that have control of all three branches, judiciary, legislature, and president. They don't seem to give a fuck. They are doing what they want to do on behalf of the people that put them there. And so I think for a lot of us who have been for years hearing from the Democratic Party, oh, we wish we could do that. Oh, we wish we could invest more in education. We wish we could have healthcare for all. We just can't. We just can't. We just can't. I think we're kind of tired of that.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting about that is, they're like shameless and relentless in advancing what their agenda is
Yeah.
when they gain control and power. And we need to be equally relentless when we're fighting for the needs of people across the state and across the country. And we see this failed strategy of like chasing some mythological, center voter and going to the right, really isn't what people want. And so it is incredible to watch. And you see Working Families Party wins across the country
Yeah.
in all kinds of states. And in some of those places, those are also DSA folks. You see this huge upswell of people demanding what we deserve and putting people into office who are going to be relentless fighters. So the time of these, lukewarm center Democrats who don't really want to take a stance and they're like, this isn't possible. We wish we could do better. We can do better. Theoretically, we have a super majority in the Oregon legislature. So that begs the question, then why aren't we able to deliver on these policies that we've said that we support for all these years? And that, blame or responsibility falls squarely on the shoulders of the people who are in leadership. And I would venture to say that a significant number of people who are in leadership positions in the Democratic Party are, still in this old paradigm that people don't want anymore. Voters are saying, we don't want this.
Yep.
Regular people are saying, we demand better. And it's not going to be okay to just say, we're going to pass the buck. Maybe in, some future year, 2050, we'll talk about how we're going to do this.
Right.
People can't wait.
No.
And so we are demanding better, and we will remove and replace the people that are impediments to that one by one. So trust and believe that's a promise. And we're not going anywhere. So come along. When we're talking about the budget, the tragedy that I've seen, and I've been in movement spaces and nonprofit, I've been in political spaces, I run campaigns, and in all the worlds, we see this race to the bottom where people are fighting for crumbs. And when they divide us that way, so, you go in and there's a hearing, and whoever could actually make it to that hearing that's at 9 a.m. on a weekday when people who are working have to work full time, they have to travel to Salem to maybe get a chance to give testimony
for 2 minutes.
People are begging. They brought their disabled children. They're like, we can't live without this critical funding for our in-home caregivers. My child needs round the clock care, and they're begging and crying for crumbs when we know that it is possible. It is absolutely possible to not only accrue the resources, but spend those resources properly. Absolutely, we should not be giving corporate handouts to data centers and subsidies when we have people who are begging for their in-home caretakers, or when we're talking about schools not being able to be funded. These critical needs of people across the state. We demand better now, and we will continue to push that agenda. Trust and believe, again, that we're fighting in all of the rooms. I was telling Mike, I showed up here as a regular person. I'm a regular working class person, but I have access to rooms where there are people of great power. And I want to not only be a voice, I am a voice for all of the things we just talked about, but I want to pull other people into those rooms, because this is a political home for you. And it's not one leader. We're a movement of leaders. We need leaders to emerge and be given the opportunity to be in those rooms and to be heard. The race to the bottom is over. That paradigm is over. We won't be divided. We will come together. And so rather than, the teachers are just going to fight for their members, or, the janitors, these people are just fighting for this one issue or that issue, or we're going to just come and beg for crumbs for caregiving. When all of those people come together, transportation, all of the things, we can actually change the entire systematic problem. And that's what the solution is. These are Band-Aid fixes that we've seen, and they give us that. They're like, okay, here's a little Band-Aid fix. We'll give you a little pot of money for this one side project. And you guys will scratch your back a little bit next session. That's not enough. That's not good enough. And we're now demanding, things like, there's something pretty nerdy called Guilty Fitty, which has been now renamed to Necti, which is basically people who are offshoring their profits. And so that's corporate taxes that are, that's not benefiting Oregon. It's hey, how can we hold these big major corporations accountable.
These corporations that benefit from our roads, our electrical grids, our education, that our workforce that they derive
100%.
from, like they are deriving all of these benefits from being here.
And they're not paying their fair share in taxes. In fact, you know, if you're just a regular person like Bob, who's like, my taxes are too high, I'm paying really high taxes and I'm having a hard time making ends meet. It's like, you're right, Bob. You are paying too much in taxes. And we hear you that you're not able to make your, you know, budget work for your family anymore. And things are getting very tight and hard to maintain. That's not fair. And how do we make that more fair? It's absolutely not going to be taking handouts from those same corporations that are offshoring their profits and then going to the legislature and serving those interests. So,
well, here's one thing that came up on a previous show that I think any Democrat or anybody across the spectrum that is aligned with working families ought to be pushing for, which is transparency in what corporations pay in taxes. Because we know what Bob pays. You know, it's obvious. Bob has a job. We know his, you know, tax bracket. We know 100%. What he pays. But these corporations who are offshoring or doing other things to avoid paying their fair share of the tax burden, we ought to know what that is. And unfortunately, there's not transparency there. So that seems like an easy win that ought to be, you know, that one would think the Democrats would be aligned with. You mentioned the Democratic Socialists of America, and I want to pull on that thread a little bit, because I think especially in this Portland area, and we talked about the Myrna Munoz race, she is aligned with the Democratic Socialists. So people, I think, might have a sense, is WFP just DSA? Is it just three different letters?
No, is the answer to that. Yeah.
Well, and what I appreciate is I think we've established through this interview, like, the values of the Working Families Party and how it's across the state. And clearly DSA is not necessarily, but unpack that a little bit. Cause sometimes you support DSA candidates, just, I suppose, like sometimes you support Republican candidates.
Exactly. Basically, we look for values alignment. So, you know, when you see, for instance, the opportunity we had in the Portland City Council in 2024, we had a new charter for the first time ever, representation in every part of Portland. You know, I worked on a race where people east of 82nd had never run before. And it's like nobody's ever knocked on these doors or bothered to talk to these folks, let alone give them meaningful representation in Portland city government. And so when we had the charter reform, we had this huge, again, opportunity, you know, on the ashes of, you know, all of the harm that has been caused by some of the previous people who were in charge of Portland. We have an opportunity to put in new folks, young people, BIPOC people, you know, DSA members, and folks who are going to represent, you know, all of these voices across the city who have not had a voice. And so, you know, a lot of people were like, we'll be so excited if we get, you know, 3 or maybe even 4, if we're lucky, champions elected in Portland. And the Working Families Party strategically looked at the map and we were like, absolutely not. We're going to get a path to 7. We want a governing majority because people deserve that and it's possible. And we, you know, we did get 7 of our endorsed candidates through, which is amazing. Now, DSA worked on 2 of those races, Mitch Green and Tiffany Koyama Lane. And so what happens in, you know, reality on the ground is there's this huge group of passionate, incredible people that want to knock doors, that are doing the work. There's an army of boots on the ground, as we say. And we see that also now, like fast forward to 2026 in Tammy Carpenter's race and Myrna Munoz out in Washington County, which is incredible. Now, what we do is we build the infrastructure and support for campaigns to be able to like plug in that army of boots on the ground. So in both of those 2 races, you know, Myrna filed very late. Tammy had actually gone through our Working Families campaign school hosted by Working Families Power, our like nonprofit sister org. And so she was trained by us. And so was her campaign manager and staff. So we were able to help her like build that infrastructure early on and plug in this like really enthusiastic army of DSA folks who want to engage and finally see somebody who represents their values. And folks will say, oh, you can't win with, you know, saying you're a democratic socialist. And definitely people would say that outside of the Portland metro.
Right.
And we proved that to be wrong. In fact, we proved that to be wrong in 2024. And even I was nervous running Rep. Farah Chaichi's reelection. She is a DSA member. There was a DSA logo on her information and her mailers and her walk pieces, and people were identifying themselves as DSA volunteers when they knocked on doors. Not everyone involved in any of these campaigns is DSA, but I do think it goes to show that attitudes are changing and perspectives are shifting. And you absolutely can be a democratic socialist and run for and win office. What I like to highlight is in cases like Zoran Mandami and so many of these other places where you see these huge victories across the country, that is a coalition of people working together. And that's true here as much as it is there. It's not just DSA, it's a huge, powerful coalition of working class folks coming together. And that does include WFP. So I'm really grateful for our partnership in the races like Tammy and Myrna's. It's a powerful block of folks working together in an unstoppable way. So,
well, you mentioned the shifting politics happening. And I think that I see that in the major parties. You see a battle for the Republican Party. I hear from people who've been Republicans their whole lives, and they're like, this is not my party. Same with Democrats. I think we've highlighted some of the things that we've seen with our institutional Democrats that have maybe gotten out of touch or taken things for granted. You've been in politics for decades at this point. You've seen the Working Families Party. You've now been with the Working Families Party for 2 years in this role. Is the Working Families Party similarly changing identities or shifting? I mean, there must be, right? So what do you see?
This is a really good question. And there's a lot of directions I want to go with it. So just to tie us back to Myrna's race, it's still not a thing that is done to challenge an incumbent senator. The last time that happened was Rod Monroe in 2017, 2018. And that was a 3-way race. I was involved there. And at the time running Casey Jama, now Senate Majority Leader Casey Jama's campaign. And we were able to take out Rod Monroe. Rod Monroe was, stopping all housing legislation from going forward. He was the chair of the Senate Housing Committee. So what a lot of regular folks who might be listening to the show don't know is that if you're in charge of a committee on, say, housing, and let's say you are potentially have a bunch of claims against you for not keeping your rental properties in order.
He was a big landlord.
He was a big landlord. And some of his properties, the claims were against him, like black mold, rats, things like that. It's like, okay, we've got potentially, I don't want to be libelous here, but potentially a slumlord running the housing committee of the Senate. And that's outrageous. So you've got somebody like that who gets to decide what bills are talked about and decided. So, anyone that cares about housing, which should be like anyone that cares about working people, is like, hey, we have to do something about this. And, that was a successful primary challenge. Fast forward, still now, when you have somebody like Myrna Munoz running against an incumbent Senator Janine Solman, who again is in leadership positions, and holds committee chairships, somebody like that, when you run against them, we hear from consultants who are like, we're sorry, we can't work for you or we'll be blacklisted by the political establishment. Yeah. Still now in 2026, it's a courageous act to get involved in these things. And we want to make this something that is more accessible for all people. So you step up to run for office. We've got your back. We're going to help you navigate this. We're going to give you the skills and the tools, and we're going to change this paradigm. And so if you look at anyone who was involved in Myrna's race, each person took on political risk to do a thing like that. Great political risk, especially her staff and the consultants that took that on. Like, for instance, truly, we could not find a male consultant who was willing to do her mailers, when you get those like glossy mailers in the mail during election season. And some people throw those away. A lot of people read them. So there's still a thing that we do. But to have no one willing to run a mail program for a huge Senate race, for any amount of money.
And to be clear, right? And I experienced this during my campaign. I had people who were saying, hey, Mike, I'd love to support you. I'd love to endorse you, but I'm being threatened by establishment people. And those establishment people control wealth and they control investments. Yes. And so for campaign consultants, they're thinking down the road. They're like, if I take this race, when you say great political risk, their livelihoods at stake, because they are being told, you will be blackballed from the establishment. We will never use your services again if you help her. So it's not just this war of ideas where we're going to both put out our ideas in democracy. We'll
And
choose
whoever
the best
has the
one.
best idea will emerge. It's not a fair process. The game is rigged.
The game is
we're
rigged.
working on unrigging the game, essentially. So, there aren't that many people that would probably maybe come on this podcast and say the things that I've seen and that I know. What I know is that in these rooms, legislators are threatened, consultants are threatened. I mean, you see like SDLF, which is it's the PAC that runs Senate races for incumbent Democrats. You see them spending $250,000, just them, not talking about corporate donations, to Janine Solman's race. That's wild. So if you're a senator and let's say you think Myrna Munoz is a better representative of her district and you want to get involved and show support, do you think there are political consequences to that?
Yep.
So what I know is that those paradigms still exist, and those people who are clinging on to those like last strings of power are getting more desperate because they're seeing and feeling the shift. And something like a victory in Myrna's race isn't just about getting one more incredible voice in the legislature. She will be that. She will be a representative for the people, but she's also changing the entire fabric of the landscape and showing that we can win. We will win, and we don't have to do things this other way. We don't have to be beholden to these corporate interests. We don't have to say, sorry, you have to wait your turn. This stuff isn't possible now. It is possible now, and we're making it possible now, and we're not going to stop.
For someone listening to this podcast and they're like, wow, I had no idea. And you and I talked about this off camera is, I think a lot of people are seeing electoral success from the Working Families Party across the country. And they're thinking themselves like, oh,
what is this
thing? Right.
Yeah.
Right. So we're coming up on a major important election cycle in November. And if people across the political spectrum are hearing what you're saying and they're thinking to themselves, wow, this actually, I want to get involved in this. What should they do? How, like maybe someone who's never been involved in politics in their entire life. I know you come across people like that. Where do they get started? What do they do?
Well, for a lot of people, there's different ways to come into the WFP. There are people who are like, hey, we tried to reform the Democratic Party and this isn't it. This isn't where I want to put my time and energy anymore. And they're looking for a new political home. And if you're one of those people and you're listening, welcome. The cool thing is you actually don't have to be registered WFP to be a member and be part of what we're doing. You can be anyone. You can have any party affiliation. You could be NAV, non-affiliated voter, and you're welcome to be part of what we're creating. And for people who haven't been part of anything and who have lost hope or who have just been like left out for too long, disenfranchised by the political process, there's a home for you here too. So we're bringing everybody together in that way. And honestly, like sometimes obviously we work with the Democrats. So it's ironic, SDLF spent $250,000 against us in one race that they lost. And now we have to work with SDLF to get some of ththese folks elected in the general. And we do. So like in 2024, we worked really heavily on swing races like Rep. Wad Nguyen, RIP, and people like that. What's interesting is I'll talk about that race. You see a 5-point difference which is major, in people who would vote for her as a Working Families Party independent, as opposed to as a Democrat. And so a lot of places where people are recognizing that the brand of Democrat isn't really like carrying any weight, perhaps because people expect them to deliver and they haven't in the way that they want and need. Still seeing WFP and independent carries a different like level of weight. And so that's true now still. So in places where there are a lot of like non-affiliated voters or people who have been left out of the process, they see WFP and we're going to engage there. So, we're in rural areas, we're in urban areas, we're all over the state. Again, I've been here for just over 2 years in this position. And I say this is like WFP 2.0. So this is a new, really bold time for us where we're building power. I'm sorry, Nicole, our organizing director, wasn't able to be here to talk about the incredible work that's being done to build regional groups and bring people in, give them like a local place to plug in, a hub for local organizing and to sort of integrate into like the broader WFP, what we're doing. But if you don't have a wolf pack near you, you can start one. We'll help you.
There you go.
And we're growing. Like, a year ago, we had no wolf packs, and now we have 12 wolf packs all over the place. So again, in rural, urban, and there are places for you to plug in. We make the process really accessible. We don't want this to be a top-down political party. And so there's a lot of like member engagement and participation. And as we grow, that will only build. We're a small and mighty crew, but doing the good work of the people day in and day out. So,
well, thank you for that good work. It's so crucial where we see growing inequality across this country just out of control. And like we've established in this episode, people having to drive hours for the nearest local health care, experiencing, not having enough food to eat on the table, not making living wages. While we're subsidizing corporations for paying people less money at the same time. So thank you for putting a relentless light on that issue and fighting for the working families of Oregon.
Thank you. It's grotesque. The wealth inequality is grotesque. And it sounds so sanitary when we say things like, and I do this all the time, but when we say, people can't put food on the table, it sounds so sanitary.
Yeah.
If you don't know what that is like, if you don't know what it's like to have children and open the cupboard and see that there's not food to make for dinner, you can't know why we fight the way that we fight, and we're not going to stop. And so when I see people who are like, oh, maybe they should eat less avocado toast, and we hear things like that, and people say things like that in rooms that I'm in, and that's the way that they behave. And I'm not just talking about people on the other side of the aisle. For too long, it's been like, oh, our problem is MAGA. These like right-wing Republicans are causing all these troubles for us. And it's like, yes, there is a problematic group of MAGA, people who are just completely beholden to corporate interests, serving the top 1%, and they want to destroy everything that we think is true and good. That's true. What is everyone else doing? We have a Democratic Party leadership in Oregon, and we expect and demand that they fight for working people and not just window dressing and lip service. Deliver on policies. That's what we expect. That's what we demand. And we will continue to fight to make that a reality by putting in people who have the lived experience and who will uplift the people who have the lived experience. So that's the bottom line, and we won't settle for anything less. But I can't do that by myself. So please join the Working Families Party. We need you. And, at the state level, we have labor unions who are made up of regular folks who drive buses and are the janitor at the school and are your local community college professor, or community orgs, BIPOC-led nonprofits who do incredible work in lots of different ways across the state. So that's kind of what the makeup of our leadership core is. And our members, again, are like every kind of political voter, people who haven't been political before. And we're just building this really beautiful multiracial working class party.
Well, take it from me. Go out, get yourself some Working Families Party swag. It'll start conversations at the gas station, in the grocery store. It's a good time. Annie, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Appreciate it.
You don't know this, but I always like to do some sort of little game thing at the end. So I've curated a game for you. And it's called Knock Knock, Who's There?
Okay.
It's a door knocking game.
All right. Say knock knock.
So here's what we're going to do.
Okay.
You're knocking my door.
Oh, okay.
I'm opening the door, and I'm going to just give you a one-line prompt, and you have to.
This is fun.
You have to respond in a way that's going to make me not shut the door, but engage. Okay, you ready?
Yeah.
Understand the rules?
Yeah, I understand the assignment.
All right, here we go. Knock knock. I'm opening my door, and I say to you, "Yeah, I don't really vote. Both parties are pretty much the same. I don't see why this matters."
You're right. Both parties have left us out, and we deserve a voice. We have a person named Myrna Munoz who's throwing her hat in the ring. She's a regular person. She's working class. And, she's the daughter of refugees, immigrants to the U.S. She's seen the way that our communities have been let down. And we're asking you to believe.
I'm opening. Tell me more. Okay, great. Here's the next one. Knock, knock. I'm opening the door. Look, I already vote straight down the Democratic ticket. Appreciate you being here, but why do I need to, why another party?
First of all, thank you so much for voting. We want to make sure that everyone turns in their ballot and that you know when the election dates are. So that's what we would lead with. And then, it's important to vote, but we want to let you know what the opportunity is and who you can vote for. So, this person who has been representing you, for instance, is a Democrat, but there's somebody else on the ballot, and the other person represents the values of working people. How are your utility bills? And we would have a conversation,
perfect.
Mike, and we would talk about all the things.
Utility
right?
bills. Tell me more. All right, here's the next one. I see you're wearing your working party's swag. Aren't you just DSA? Isn't this the same thing? You're some lefty crazy person.
All right, tell me where this door is.
Oh, good question. This door is in Portland.
We definitely work with DSA, and this candidate is endorsed by DSA and the Working Families Party. The reason I'm here knocking on your door is because Tiffany Kiyama-Lane is going to fight for working families. She's a teacher, and she's seen those struggles that we've talked about through our conversation show up in her classroom. So she has the lived experience, not just herself, but from folks that have come through all the families that she has served in her role as a teacher. She knows why we need policy change. So, we've brought her in to do that work.
Love it. All right. Knock, knock. I'm opening the door. Look, I'm a Republican, but I'll tell you this. My taxes are killing me. So what do you got to say about that?
Yeah, taxes are too high. The working class has been paying. And what are we getting? So, honestly, there are these folks that are just not paying their fair share. And we need tax accountability. Like, you shouldn't have to pay more taxes when these ultra wealthy folks are getting off scot-free. That's not fair. But yeah, we know we need that pothole filled down the road that I just ran over on my way to knock on your door. So yeah, it's a hard time right now. Economic times are hard and people are feeling the squeeze in every part of the state. And that squeeze there's a solution to that. We need relief, and the relief comes by demanding the ultra wealthy pay their fair share.
All right, knock, knock. Your Working Families Party. Oh, you guys are against data centers.
We should have started with this.
Yeah,
No.
You're against data centers. What's the deal? I mean, I thought you guys were pro labor, pro jobs. Isn't this going to create jobs for our community? What's your deal?
Oh wow, Mike, you're going to go there. First of all, there needs to be a community process whenever we're considering doing something as major as bringing in a data center into a community. If there are going to be data centers, we need to ensure that they're being put in responsibly. We're not displacing local farmland. We're thinking about community impacts, the impact on, your utilities, the electric grid, the quality of your water, and health impacts to the surrounding area. So we need to be very intentional. If we are going to be doing data centers, we shouldn't be giving them massive subsidies. One of the arguments that's being made is that it's an economic boom for us. Like, oh, these people are going to bring revenue to Oregon, but that can't be possible and can't coexist with us giving them subsidies to be here. So we're subsidizing these people to come in and destroy our communities with no process at all. Like, that's not acceptable, and we demand better.
Well done. Knock, knock. Little kid answers the door. My mom says I don't talk to strangers.
I love that. I'm a mommy. So is your mommy here? I'm the mom of 4 kids. So.
All right. The only wrong answer was here's some candy, right?
No, actually, I love talking. I love when kids are there. Again, I've knocked like hundreds of thousands of doors. I love it. And I love talking to 2 kids because they're in the background and they hear and they see how we behave.
Yeah.
And if we want to have children that have hope for the future, which is a thing right now, a lot of people are losing faith and, believing maybe there isn't a future reality that's livable for us and that's going to be positive. Kids are watching. And so every chance that I have to bring power and hope to people at a door, I love. And I love when kids are in the background for that.
All right. Last one. Knock, knock. I'm opening the door. I see you standing there, Annie. I'm like, you people show up every 2 years.
Yes, we need to do better on that, Mike. No, that's actually, this isn't really an answer to a knock knock, but it is true that for too long, it's been transactional. So you see, people showing up every 2 years at election time.
Or even less frequently, as we talked about since Barack Obama ran.
And it's just this transactional interaction where you're like, hey, we want your vote. Give us your vote. We're out. And so that's also not acceptable. We need to maintain a long-term relationship with people and have that feedback. And that's part of the way that these folks get out of touch. Some of the candidates aren't even doing that every 2 years, as shown by the Barack Obama comment. But the 2 years itself isn't good enough. Like, we need to be having this kind of interaction and creating space for people to get engaged in the political process, which, again, like, for too long, it hasn't been a transparent process. It's like, where can I come? What decisions are being made that impact me? Oh, there's a data center going in. Was there a public meeting? How did people have the opportunity to even learn that there was a public meeting or that their voice could be heard potentially? So creating that, for you at the door, we want to create those opportunities for you to be able to have your voice heard. You deserve that. Like, you're a community member. You live here. You have a voice. And that's what we should give people more than every 2 years. So you're right. We don't show up at the door that way. So you'll notice the big difference in we did paid field for Myrna. It's like, if we knocked on your door, that was a different interaction than the one that you probably are used to having with like the traditional folks that show up every 2 years on an election cycle. We genuinely care. We had working families members out knocking doors. They're from the working class. Some of them are from the neighborhood and talking to their own neighbors about what is possible. So you'll feel a difference if a Working Families Party person knocks on your door.
Well, congratulations. You won the game. You got my vote. I'm supporting the Working Families Party. You can count on me this November.
I want to really quickly say we do have that big event coming up that I mentioned. So the Working Families Party nominating convention weekend, we'll be joined by our national director, Maurice Mitchell, who's coming out. Absolutely inspirational, incredible leader. And we'll have lots of folks who are doing incredible work across the state, talking panels and, camaraderie, a big dinner together. If you want to join WFP, you can text the word member to 30403. And so we would love to see you there.
Great. Well, thank you so much. For those of you listening, I will paste a link in the show notes so that you can go on and click there. Or like Annie said, just text that number and become a member of the Working Families Party. I heartily endorse that and suggest you do. Thank you so much, Annie, for being on the show. So a party that just proved it can be a sitting Democratic senator in her own primary, won 37 out of 49 races that they got involved with, have a message about corporate power and affordability that on paper should at least land with everyone, and the 1.4 million Oregonians who've walked away from both parties entirely searching for a home. The question I keep coming back to is one that we spent half of our conversation on, is this Working Families Party a message to changing the Democratic Party from within, or are we fighting across the spectrum from working families everywhere? I think you heard from their state director that this is a party that everybody can get behind. Whatever you make of that, one thing is true. This November, Oregonians are going to keep answering their doors to canvassers asking for their vote. Whether those canvassers can turn that unclaimed 44% of unaffiliated actual voters into votes, that's the story we'll be watching between now and Election Day. Thanks so much to Annie Naranjo Rivera for the conversation. If this was the first time you are learning about Oregon's Working Family Party, check out the show notes. You can click the links to figure out where you can connect with them. Share this episode, tell other people about what you learned, and let's have a more informed electorate as we go into a very important midterm election in November. I'm Mike Schmidt. This has been Schmidt Show PDX, and we will catch you next time.